So appropriately, next, we're going to turn to the Chinese state and its approach to the online world. China is putting forward the most cogent ideological alternative to universal rights since the end of the Cold War. What's notable is that technology isn't an ancillary reflection of this ideology. It's the mechanism through which the Communist Party asserts its authoritarian power. As the technology and rules governing it are exported around the world, it has real power in shifting how companies in democratic countries operate, as well as the norms and expectations for the international community as a whole. We'll now turn to Naima Green-Riley to share her insights on Chinese conceptions of what the CCP calls discourse power. Naima is a non-resident fellow with us here at the DFR Lab and a leading scholar on how states attempt to influence foreign publics through public diplomacy. Naima, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rose. Well, as Rose said, today I'm going to talk a bit about how Chinese leaders and intellectuals think about building China's image internationally. And in particular, I'm going to address the following questions. What are some of the key goals of Chinese decision makers in building China's image around the world? How do those goals play out? And what role does discourse power theory, one of the motivating ideas undergirding China's strategic thinking in the information space, play in China's rhetoric and actions that are directed overseas? So let's turn to the next slide to get started. We can just turn over to the next slide. Yep. So I'm going to take you back to March 2021. And you'll remember that that was the first time the Chinese leadership met with representatives of the new Biden administration. So at that meeting, senior Chinese diplomat Yang Jiechi said, "I don't think the overwhelming majority of countries in the world would recognize that the universal values advocated by the United States could represent international public opinion." And then in response to that, Secretary Blinken said, "I have to tell you, what I'm hearing is very different from what you described. I'm hearing deep satisfaction that the United States is back, and I'm also hearing deep concern about some of the actions your government has taken." So this snapshot is quick, but it illustrates what I would characterize as a real narrative contest between the United States and China. It's no surprise to many of you that in recent years, we've seen China's rhetoric become increasingly at odds with US rhetoric on the international stage. And that's been a gradual trend that's led to this point. So Deng Xiaoping, who was a Chinese leader in the 1970s, is well known for saying, "Tao Guang Yang Hui." It's a catchphrase that means that China at the time needed to hide its strength, bide its time, not take on too large a leadership role on the international stage. And for many years, from the late 1970s until the end of this millennium or last millennium, there were other catchphrases, things like China's peaceful rise, China's peaceful development, that China would promote. But on the whole, China's outward rhetoric was not particularly bold. Yet in the past decade or so, especially since Xi Jinping has taken the helm in the CCP, we hear an increasing indication that China sees itself as a global leader and wants others to recognize and respect that leadership. And as friction in the US-China relationship grew during the Trump years, both sides began to drop the niceties. So let's move on to the next slide, and I'll tell you about some of the principles that guide Chinese thought on its role in the world. At the core of Xi Jinping's political vision is a call for the national rejuvenation of the great Chinese nation. This is a quotation that you hear often spoken by both Xi Jinping and other Chinese leaders. And that national rejuvenation narrative ties contemporary China to 5,000 years of history, and it often harkens back to what Chinese leaders see as a resplendent Qing empire, which was known for having a really profitable trade network, very strong diplomatic ties, and cultural influence in the region. So when she talks about rejuvenation, the idea is not only that Chinese leaders will provide more for their people domestically, focus on their economic and social planning, but also that China has a place of prominence to regain internationally. And so this rejuvenation narrative is one key political concept for Chinese leadership. Now, another key concept that many Chinese leaders are very enamored with is the concept of soft power. It was coined by a US academic, Zhou Nai, in the late 1980s, early 1990s. But Chinese leaders really love the idea that a country could exert power simply by being attractive to others. But what I really want to delve in today is a concept called discourse power, or 话语权. And the term in Chinese itself doesn't really have to be linked to international affairs. It could be used to describe a certain group in a society, like young people who've gained the greater ability to have their views count, their opinions matter in society. But in the international context, Chinese intellectuals have used the concept to express the idea that Chinese words should have more weight on the international stage. So many Chinese intellectuals have been irked by the fact that when American leaders make international proclamations, when they go to the United Nations, when US private news channels like CNN go to other countries, many people seek them as sources of information. So for China, building its discourse power would entail increasing its authoritativeness, increasing the appeal and regard for Chinese positions in the world, for Chinese proclamations or Chinese statements around the world. Let's move on. Next slide. So these are some images depicting the manifestations of China's quest to increase its global discourse power. China's opened over 500 Confucius Institutes. These are centers that teach Mandarin language and offer cultural activities in communities all around the world. China's launched a worldwide infrastructure and development project through the Belt and Road Initiative, which many do not know has a people-to-people component. China has sought to build up its externally focused distribution of state-controlled media channels like China Global Television Network, CGTN, or China Today, which is a newspaper. And also Chinese officials have flocked in recent years to Western social media outlets, which Chinese citizens in the PRC cannot access because they're blocked by a government-imposed firewall, to communicate with people in other parts of the world. Next slide. What's interesting is that there's a bit of a parallel between how the CCP handles information control domestically and activities that we're seeing internationally. So political scientist Margaret Roberts wrote an entire book on CCP's censorship of information domestically in China. And I won't go into her argument in depth, but in it, she talks about 3 ways that the Chinese government controls information that Chinese citizens can consume. She talks about fear, which means that the government relies on the fear that citizens have of being punished for accessing or spreading certain information. Friction, which talks about how the government makes it difficult to access certain websites by blocking them through the firewall. And she talks about flooding. And flooding entails inundating local internet with content that's promoted by the Communist Party to distract people from information that the government sees as unsavory. And that flooding is often paired with censoring politically charged information that the CCP does not want people to consume. And Roberts talks about the 50 Cent Party, which is an organization that allegedly pays netizens to post en masse on social media platforms. And they focus on content that is party approved. Next slide. Well, what's interesting is that some of the information operations that have been identified by social media sites like Twitter involve the mass amplification of pro-Beijing content that seems to mirror the domestic strategy of social media flooding in China. Next slide. And unfortunately, in the past year or so, some social media companies and US government entities have linked disinformation campaigns, spreading false information via messaging and social media platforms in the United States to agents of the PRC. And these kinds of campaigns are even more common in the Chinese-speaking world in places like Hong Kong and Taiwan. Next slide. So, as we look at these actions that the Chinese government has taken, it's useful to be able to understand the political ideology that motivates them, this concept of discourse power. And the desire to gain discourse power is very important to the Chinese government and to the CCP. So I wanted to close by sharing these excerpts that you see on the screen from a recent meeting of the CCP Central Committee Political Bureau, which indicate that the party relies on the concept of building discourse power as it invests in its international communications, in its outreach, in its public diplomacy, in its engagement with the world. And I hope this talk has been helpful in breaking down the concept of discourse power for Chinese leadership and how it manifests itself in China's actions today.